But there's another layer to this calm that few people ever reach. The point where silence is no longer a shield, but a source of creation. A power that doesn't just protect you, but reshapes the world around you. Topic 8. When silence turns into power, there's a moment when silence stops being a defense and becomes a weapon of transformation. At first, you use silence to protect yourself, to retreat, to heal, to stop feeding chaos. But as time passes, something changes. That quiet space that once felt like loneliness starts to feel like power. You begin to realize silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of control. The Stoics discovered this centuries ago. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, he wasn't speaking to the world. He was speaking into the silence of his own mind. Each page a conversation with himself, each thought a refinement of discipline. The emperors and philosophers of the past didn't use silence to hide, they used it to build, because silence has a strange alchemy. The longer you sit in it, the more it transforms pain into wisdom, confusion into clarity, weakness into strength. The world will call it isolation, but the wise know it's incubation. Inside that quiet, you begin to rebuild yourself, not as the world expects you to be, but as you truly are. When you stop explaining yourself, you start hearing yourself. When you stop reacting, you start noticing what matters. Suddenly, you're no longer waiting for the next apology, the next validation, the next word that will make everything right. You realize everything you needed to hear, you could have told yourself all along. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Why? Because silence often makes you misunderstood. People who crave noise will think your calm is coldness, your peace is arrogance. But that's the price of mastery. Being misread by those still trapped in reaction. Every time you hold your silence, you're training your mind. You're proving to yourself that you don't need to be heard to have worth. You don't need to be seen to exist in strength. You don't need to respond to confirm your dignity. The stillness becomes your discipline, your temple, your proof that you've evolved beyond the chaos. The beauty of silence is that it amplifies your presence. It makes people feel you without you having to speak. They remember your calm long after your words would have been forgotten. Your silence becomes an echo in their minds, not of arrogance, but of authority. And here lies the hidden truth. The longer you stay in silence, the more you start to sense something ancient, a kind of inner dialogue between who you were and who you're becoming. You feel the strength of every moment you didn't react, every time you chose peace over pride. And in that realization, something even greater begins to awaken. The quiet voice that tells you not just to survive in silence, but to lead through it. Topic 9. Leading through silence. There's a stage in the Stoic path when silence is no longer just self-preservation, it becomes leadership. Not the kind of leadership that commands through volume, but the kind that guides through presence. When your silence begins to shape the energy of a room, when your calm steadies those around you, when people look to your restraint as strength, that's when you've crossed into a deeper mastery. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire not by shouting orders, but by embodying composure. His soldiers followed him not because he was loud, but because he was anchored. When the world around him fell into chaos, his silence became a compass. His calm was contagious, a silent authority that demanded no explanation. That's the Stoics' version of leadership. Stillness that commands respect, not by demand, but by example. When you've learned to remain silent in storms, you begin to notice how noise drives most of humanity. People argue to feel heard, react to feel relevant, and shout to cover their own uncertainty. But you've walked through the fire of misunderstanding, rejection, and solitude, and now you understand. Calm is magnetic. The world leans toward what it cannot shake. The greatest leaders are not those who speak the most, but those whose silence carries meaning. Their eyes say what words cannot. Their stillness becomes a message. I don't control the storm. I control myself within it. That's what draws people in. Because in a world addicted to reaction, self-control looks like power. And yet, this isn't about dominance. It's about discipline. True Stoic silence doesn't rise above others. It grounds them. It doesn't intimidate. it inspires. When someone around you is consumed by emotion, your calm presence reminds them of what they forgot, that they too can choose peace. You lead not by forcing, but by reflecting the possibility of inner order. Seneca once said, "He who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior." And when you master that internal battle, when you can sit in silence while others rage, when you can listen instead of react, you become that warrior. Not with a sword, but with serenity. People start noticing that your strength is quiet, your reactions are measured, your energy steady. They feel it. They trust it. But there's something else that happens once you reach this point. Something even the Stoics hinted at but rarely described. Because once silence turns into leadership, once calm becomes your native state, you begin to influence not just people, but reality itself. You stop reacting to circumstances and start shaping them, quietly, intentionally, like a sculptor with marble. And that's where the final transformation begins, the moment when silence is no longer just your power. It becomes your legacy. Topic 10. The legacy of silence. There comes a point in the Stoic journey where silence stops being a reaction to the world. It becomes your way of being in it. What began as restraint has now evolved into presence. You've walked through the noise, the battles, the misunderstandings, and you've learned that the truest form of power doesn't announce itself. It simply is. Silence at this stage becomes sacred. It's not about ignoring the world, but about standing above it, not in arrogance, but in awareness. The Stoics never sought to silence others. They sought to silence the chaos within themselves so that wisdom could finally be heard. Marcus Aurelius's greatest victories were not on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments before dawn, when he wrote to himself about patience, humility, and purpose. That's the real empire, the one you build inside. When your silence reaches this depth, it starts to echo. People feel it when you walk into a room. They sense something unspoken, a steadiness, a clarity, an energy that says, this person doesn't need to prove anything. And that, paradoxically, is what makes them listen. Because in a world obsessed with noise, your quiet confidence becomes unforgettable. You start to realize that silence doesn't just protect your peace, it transmits it. Every moment you choose not to argue, you teach. Every time you walk away instead of explaining, you demonstrate self-respect. Every time you choose calm over reaction, you model mastery. Without speaking a word, you become a message, one that says, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight to be strong. Seneca wrote, associate with people who are likely to improve you. But what happens when you become that person? When your silence begins to improve those around you? Not through correction, but through presence. That's when silence becomes legacy. It outlives your words. It shapes the people who witness it. It turns restraint into reverence. And as you keep walking this path, something even deeper takes root. You stop needing silence to defend yourself because peace is no longer something you protect. It's something you radiate. It flows through your tone, your actions, your choices. It becomes the atmosphere around you. Calm, unshakable, unmistakably powerful. You start to understand what Marcus meant when he said, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one, because silence is the proof. It's the final word, the ultimate discipline, the mark of someone who has conquered the loudest battlefield of all, their own mind. And yet, even here, there's one final layer the Stoics hinted at, a state beyond silence, beyond mastery. The place where peace and purpose meet, and you no longer live merely by reaction or restraint, but by revelation. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. You don't have to shout to be heard. When you go silent after being hurt, after being misunderstood, or after realizing someone's mask has slipped, you're not retreating. You're observing. You're creating a space where truth walks in uninvited. Watch carefully. Some people vanish the moment your words disappear. They were never there for you. They were there for the attention your voice gave them. Others grow restless in your silence because they thrived on control, not connection. They depended on your reactions to feel powerful. When you stop giving them that reaction, they lose their grip. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects the intentions of everyone around you. The one who respects you will reach out not with noise, but with sincerity. The one who used you will disappear, unable to face their own emptiness. The one who manipulated you will grow angry, because silence is the one thing they can't twist. The Stoics didn't believe in testing people with words. They believed in watching patterns. Because a person's truth is never in what they say. It's in what they repeatedly do. And when you step back, when you stop filling the air with explanations, the patterns finally emerge. Here's the paradox. The less you say, the more you learn. In silence, you begin to notice details you once overlooked. The pauses in their speech, the tone behind their apologies, the inconsistency between their promises and their presence. Silence turns you into a witness instead of a participant. And that distance, that quiet distance, reveals everything words once hid. But silence doesn't just expose others. It also exposes you. It shows what you've been avoiding. The part of you that wanted to believe, that kept explaining, that kept hoping words could fix what actions destroyed. When you fall silent, you meet that version of yourself face to face. And it's in that meeting that real change begins. Because when you can finally stand in your own silence without fear, when you can watch truth unfold without needing to control it, that's when a new kind of power starts to rise within you. A power the Stoics knew well. The quiet confidence that no longer needs to explain itself to anyone. Topic 5. The strength of not explaining yourself. There is a moment in every Stoic's journey when they finally understand this. Not explaining yourself isn't coldness, it's mastery. It's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs the world's permission to exist in peace. You felt it before. That pull inside when someone misunderstands you, twists your words, questions your character. Your first instinct is to explain, to clarify, to fix the image they've built in their mind. You want to prove you're not what they think. But every explanation feels like sand slipping through your fingers. No matter how much you speak, they don't listen. No matter how much you prove, they don't see. And the more you try to convince them, the smaller you feel. Marcus Aurelius warned about this trap. He said, "Don't waste what remains of your life in speculation about your neighbors." Because when you start living for someone else's understanding, you stop living for your own peace. Explaining yourself is often not communication. It's begging for validation. It's trying to repaint your worth for eyes that have already decided not to see you clearly. The Stoic, however, learns the art of stillness amid accusation. When people throw words like stones, he stands unmoved. Not because he's indifferent, but because he knows the truth doesn't need defending. It endures on its own. The one who remains silent in the face of misunderstanding holds the real power. Silence becomes a declaration. I'm not here to convince you. I am here to live according to my principles. That kind of restraint requires strength most people never build. It's easier to argue than to walk away. It's easier to speak than to stay calm, but silence is the highest form of composure. It's a test of faith in yourself, that your integrity is enough, that your actions will speak when words are twisted. People may call you distant. They'll say you've changed, but in truth, you've simply outgrown the need to explain. Because when you stop explaining, something beautiful happens. The noise around you starts to quiet down, and the peace within you starts to rise. You begin to realize that your energy is too sacred to be spent on convincing others to respect what they cannot comprehend. And here's the paradox. Once you stop explaining yourself, you attract the people who actually understand you, the ones who feel your calm without needing your words, the ones who respect your silence because they've earned their own. But there's a reason this kind of peace feels rare, because it doesn't just come from confidence. It comes from something deeper, something that only emerges when you stop reacting altogether, when your silence transforms from mere stillness into detachment. Topic 6. Detachment in silence. Is what teaches the lesson. There is a kind of silence that doesn't just end conversations, it ends cycles. It's not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of mastery. The Stoics called it detachment. And it's one of the highest forms of wisdom a human being can practice. When you finally stop reacting, something changes. The game ends. People who once fed on your energy, your words, your emotions, suddenly find themselves facing a void. You no longer explain. You no longer argue. You no longer participate in the noise. And that absence becomes their mirror. It reflects everything they refused to see while you were still talking. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And that's exactly what happens when you go silent. Your absence forces others to live inside their own imagination, to replay the moments, to question themselves, to wonder what they lost. You don't teach them through anger. You teach them through distance. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped handing your peace to those who misuse it. You've learned that sometimes the greatest power is not in saying, "I'm done," but in being done, quietly, firmly, and without ceremony. That's what confuses people the most. They expect noise. They expect drama. But when you simply step back with grace, they lose the script. Because your silence tells a story their ego can't rewrite. The Stoics understood that true freedom comes from mastering the self, not the situation. When you detach, you're no longer seeking to win arguments. You're seeking to win yourself back. The storm may rage around you, but you've anchored yourself in calm. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You need only peace. And peace doesn't shout. Your quiet detachment becomes the lesson. It tells the world, "I will not fight for space where I am not respected. I will not explain my worth to those who refuse to see it. I will not keep bleeding for someone who calls it rain." And that lesson stings, not because of what you said, but because of what you no longer give. That's the paradox of Stoic silence. What they once took for granted becomes sacred the moment it's gone. But here's the secret that most miss. Detachment isn't the end. It's the doorway, because once you've learned to detach from others, something even deeper begins. A transformation where you stop seeking peace from people altogether and begin discovering it within yourself. Topic 7. The power shift. When you stop reacting, something strange happens the moment you stop reacting. The entire balance of power shifts. You've probably felt it before, that rising fire when someone disrespects you, lies to you, or provokes you. Your mind screams, "Say something! Defend yourself! Prove your point!" But deep down, a calmer voice, the Stoic voice, whispers, "Don't." Because every reaction is a transaction. Every time you respond in anger, justify yourself, or try to fix their perception, you're trading your peace for a fleeting sense of control. And the Stoics knew that trade is never worth it. When you stop reacting, the world doesn't know what to do with you. People who once thrived on your emotions start to lose their footing. They can't feed off your energy anymore. They can't manipulate your response. You've become unreadable, untouchable, unpredictable. And that unsettles them more than any argument ever could. Think of Marcus Aurelius in the chaos of the Roman court. Surrounded by betrayal, pressure, and endless noise, yet remaining still as marble. That's not weakness, that's dominion over the self. Because the man who can remain calm when provoked isn't repressing his emotions, he's mastering them. When someone insults you and you don't react, you take away their weapon. When someone ignores you and you don't chase, you take away their power. When someone tries to pull you into drama and you stay silent, you reveal their chaos, not yours. Every unreacted moment builds your fortress, a wall made not of pride, but of peace. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That's the heartbeat of Stoicism. You can't control what people do, say, or think, but you can control whether you hand them the keys to your emotional state. And that decision, that sacred pause, is where freedom begins. The non-reactive person is not passive. He's deliberate. His silence is not submission, it's strategy. It's a statement that says, "I choose not to engage at the level you're offering," because silence isn't empty, it's full of intention. It's a form of self-respect disguised as calm, and soon, something even deeper starts to happen. You realize that you don't just stop reacting to others, you stop reacting to life itself. Delays, rejections, disappointments. The noise of existence stops shaking you. You begin to move like a still lake, reflective, patient, and unshakably clear. The power of Stoic silence. They ignored your message. They misunderstood your silence. They thought your calm was weakness, but they were wrong. The Stoics taught that silence is not emptiness, it's power. Power that makes people wonder what you're thinking. Power that reclaims your peace without saying a single word. Today you'll discover how silence turns pain into discipline, and how stillness becomes your strongest form of revenge. Because what comes next isn't about being quiet. It's about becoming unshakable. Topic 1. The power of silence. The world today screams. Every platform, every person, every moment seems desperate to be heard. People defend their opinions as if silence meant defeat. But the Stoic, the true Stoic, moves differently. While the world burns itself out trying to be understood, he remains calm, still, deliberate. Because silence is not the absence of power, it's the containment of it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that, "The more we value things outside our control, the less control we have. And nothing slips faster from our control than the need to be heard." The moment you start explaining yourself to people who have already chosen not to understand you, you hand them the key to your peace. You say, "Here, take my calm, take my energy, take my time." But the Stoic doesn't make that trade. He doesn't chase the noise of the crowd. He builds his strength in stillness. Silence to him is not retreat. It's a weapon sharpened by restraint. Imagine standing in front of someone who expects your reaction, your anger, your words, your explanation, and instead you give them nothing. Just presence, just calm. That's when power shifts, because silence unnerves the loud. It disarms the manipulative. It reveals the insecure. The one who doesn't react becomes the one who leads. Epictetus taught that freedom begins the moment you stop needing others to validate your peace. When you stop justifying your choices, you stop being a slave to misunderstanding. Your silence becomes a statement stronger than defense. It says, "I know who I am, and I don't need your permission to be it." But silence is not easy. It demands discipline. It demands the courage to walk away from the endless noise of explanation. It requires trust in your own judgment when the world insists on misreading you. That's why so few master it. Because silence is not natural, it's trained. It's built, like a muscle, in the quiet moments when you resist the urge to reply, to prove, to react. And here's the paradox. Silence speaks. It speaks in absence. It speaks in calm. It speaks in the steady gaze that refuses to break. The louder the world becomes, the more valuable silence is. Every word unsaid becomes a sign of inner mastery. Every pause becomes a declaration. I am not moved by noise. Yet beneath this calm surface lies something even deeper. Something the Stoics knew but the world has forgotten. Because silence doesn't only speak to others, it begins to speak to you. And when that happens, something shifts inside, a revelation that only the truly still can hear. Topic 2. Absence speaks louder than words. When you fall silent, something strange happens. The people who once ignored your words begin to notice your silence. They start to wonder where your energy went, why your voice disappeared, why their power over you no longer works. That's the paradox of absence. It shouts louder than presence ever could. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "He who does not understand your silence will probably not understand your words." When you withdraw your explanations, you create space, a void that forces others to face themselves. The person who expected you to beg suddenly confronts their own emptiness. The manipulator who thrived on reaction meets the silence of a wall they cannot move. Think about the last time you chose not to respond, not out of pride, but out of clarity. At first, it feels unnatural. Your instincts scream, "Say something, defend yourself. Prove your worth." But when you resist, when you let the silence linger, a shift begins. The silence starts to work for you. It exposes motives, reveals truth, and separates what's real from what's fragile. Because silence, when chosen, is presence, magnified. It's not a lack of words. It's a command of them. It says, I could explain myself, but I no longer need to. It's the energy of someone who knows their value doesn't depend on convincing anyone else to see it. And make no mistake, silence is not passive. It's active control. It's you reclaiming the emotional territory that words once surrendered. Every time you don't text back, every time you walk away from chaos without fanfare, you're sending a message far stronger than any argument could deliver. You're saying, I've left the battlefield because I no longer need to fight for peace. Those who misunderstand your silence will call it arrogance. They'll say you've changed. They'll question your heart. But in truth, silence is transformation, and it's evolution disguised as distance. You've stopped trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. And here's where the true beauty of absence lies. It forces others to feel what your presence once gave freely. Your attention, your energy, your time. When those disappear, they realize your worth not in your words, but in their loss. That's why silence is feared, because it reveals who depended on your noise to feel alive. But as silence reshapes the outer world, something deeper begins to stir inside. The quiet no longer feels like distance. It begins to sound like truth, because once the noise fades, you finally hear the one voice that's been waiting beneath it all. Topic 3. In silence, you hear the truth. Louder, the world fears silence because it strips away illusion. When everything grows quiet, the truth starts to whisper. Not the kind of truth that flatters, but the kind that confronts. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. In silence, that estimate, your perception, becomes clear. When noise surrounds you, you can hide from yourself. You can distract the mind with conversation, validation, scrolling, venting, endless noise. But when the world goes quiet, when you finally stop chasing the next message or explanation, you come face to face with something you can't escape, your own reflection. At first, it's uncomfortable. The silence feels heavy, almost suffocating. Your mind starts to echo with thoughts you tried to outrun. Why did I stay in that relationship so long? Why do I need their approval? Why do I speak when I know they'll never listen? These questions sting, but they're sacred. Because they're not punishments. They're revelations. The silence becomes your teacher, your mirror, your battlefield and sanctuary at once. When you stop speaking, you start listening. Truly listening. Not to the world, but to your soul. Beneath the layers of fear, pride, and noise, there's a voice that's been waiting patiently. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply says, this is who you are. This is what you value. This is what must change. Most people will never reach this stage because silence demands courage. It demands that you stop seeking truth outside yourself and start uncovering it within. The Stoics practiced this every day. They called it reflection. Before dawn and before sleep, they entered silence to meet themselves honestly. They didn't scroll. They didn't explain. They listened. And in that stillness, they discovered something most of us overlook. Noise keeps us dependent. Silence makes us independent. Noise tells us what to feel. Silence asks us why we feel it. Noise feeds the ego. Silence feeds the spirit. That's why true clarity doesn't come from speaking, it comes from stillness. The more you explain, the more confused you become. The more you sit in silence, the clearer everything becomes. And clarity, once found, changes everything. How you love, how you forgive, how you walk away. But there's one more truth hidden in that stillness, one that frightens even the strong. Because when you begin to hear yourself clearly, you also begin to realize something uncomfortable. Not everyone is meant to hear that same truth with you. And that realization changes the way you seek closure forever. If these words already resonate with you, stop scrolling and take a breath. You're not here by accident. You're here because your spirit is ready to rise above the noise. Hit subscribe and stay on this path of clarity and power. Because every week we sharpen the Stoic mind. One truth, one silence, one transformation at a time. Topic 4. Silence reveals what words try to hide words are easy. They protect us, disguise us, decorate our lies, and soften our truths. Anyone can speak beautifully while hiding their intentions behind carefully chosen phrases. But silence exposes. It peels away the layers of performance until only what's real remains. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say." That's the essence of Stoic wisdom. You don't learn who someone is by their speeches or promises. You learn by watching what they do when the talking stops. Because silence, unlike words, can't be manipulated. It's pure reflection. It doesn't protect. It reveals. Let your silence speak for you, with calm, with strength, with dignity. Leave a comment below with the words, "My silence is my power." And let's build a circle of minds that no chaos can shake. Subscribe and walk with us. Because this is not the end of your silence. It's the beginning of your awakening.